Welcome to the latest printed press from the UK and around the world. And now for today's headlines. Boris Johnson will seek a Brexit extension from the EU if no withdrawal deal is reached by the 19th of October. Government documents say the revelation in a Scottish court appears to be a direct contradiction of the Prime Minister's do or die pledge to get the UK out of the bloc on the 31st of October with or without an agreement in place. The UK's most prolific gun is off the streets. Following a police operation, the firearm was used for 5 attempted murders, 8 home attacks, shootings at a shopping centre and 1 at a chip shop. ABBA star Björn Ulvaeus backs Greta Thunberg for the climate change activists. The singer says, even if you agree with me on everything, you have to admire her guts and her focus. Edward Putman, a convicted rapist, was guilty of cashing in a fake 2.5 million lottery ticket. He conspired with a Camelot insider to cheat the system and present a counterfeit slip in 2009. And that's it for today's headlines. And now I'm really happy to introduce our guest for tonight. We have Labour Party councillor, representative of Bowes and Enfield, YASEMIN Brett, who's also the co-founder of Enfield Stand Up to Racism. Welcome, YASEMIN.
Welcome, thank you so much, and merhaba
to
all our Turkish speakers as well.
Yes, and LYNDA Brennan, chair of Enfield Stand Up to Racism.
Thank you
Welcome.
for inviting me.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. I think we're going to have an amazing programme tonight. The first question that I'd actually like to ask you is if you could tell us what Stand Up to Racism is, and that goes out to both of you. What does it stand for?
Well, Enfield Stand Up to Racism is part of the Nazi League in the 70s, which was a huge popular cultural movement, and all you needed to do to belong to it was be anti-racist and anti-fascist.
Yes.
And some of us recognised that there were real threats across Europe, across the world, from Trump to Modi to Johnson to various to Orban in Hungary, and a real threat of the rise of the far right. And we realised that what we needed was a visible, concrete activity made up of a large group of people who were willing to get out there and fight and stand up to both racism and the rise of the far right. In this country, as you probably know, we had Tommy Robinson, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, who has who comes across as being, you know, everybody's next door neighbour, like a nice young man, but in fact he's got serious connections with Bannon, who has paid for a lot of far-right activity across Europe. And he's got serious connections with all the European far-right movements. So we have every right to feel worried about that, feel like we're not making it up. And this is what our movement is about. It's about racism and fascism and standing together where we see the rise of Islamophobia, for example, 50% in the last year increase in hate crime against Muslim people, for example. And it's about people who get out on the streets and work in their local community to raise this issue and stand together.
Okay, so it's actually, there is an outreach programme where you do go out on the street. I mean, before we go on to that, how does this link to the hostile environment? Because we've got that as our title tonight, and it's our focus. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'd like to thank you also very much for inviting us here today, and Linda has outlined what Stand Up to Racism is about. I mean, of course there has been racism throughout the ages, but what we've really seen is more of a spike in racism in the last 4 or 5 years. And we can say that, you know, Stand Up to Racism, some of the leading figures in it are from the Labour Party, for example, John McDonnell, Diane Abbott. And there is a reaction to the policies that have been implemented going from the coalition government onwards, where you see that they have brought in a series of administrative measures in order to make staying in the UK as difficult as possible. And this has been enacted in several areas. The NHS, for one, where they're now checking on your status as to whether you can stay here or not. In various other public services, immigration, you're seeing all kinds of different policy enactments that are making it very difficult for people, when in fact people are perhaps not aware of their rights. For example, in the case of the NHS, if you are even of any background, you can go and you use a GP service if you need to. And the NHS is not supposed to be asking you whether or not you have the status to stay here, to ask for an ID document.
So they don't actually have the right to do that?
They don't, it's not mandated, no. It's not mandated, but a lot of people don't know that.
No, because when you're asked, I think it would be quite intimidating for the individual.
And I have seen where it has been asked, where in actual fact it doesn't need to be asked. It's not mandatory. And in this hostile environment, the government has basically outsourced its whole immigration policy to the different public agencies, and is sort of using them as gatekeepers for the services, that some of which, you know, people are entitled to, and we are seeing that.
Yes, okay. I mean, could you tell us a little bit about the current projects that you are involved in with Stand Up to Racism?
We've been involved, first of all, on the hostile environment. We're looking particularly at the 3 million of EU citizens here, EU migrants here, many of whom, of course, have been here for several years, got roots here, paid their taxes and so on, most of whom. And we're very worried because we think that come the 31st of October, as Priti Patel, of course, has said, she's spreading fear about what their status is going to be. I mean, Yasmin can talk much more about that. But I'd just like to say, before we talk about the 3 million, we've also campaigned about Windrush, because of course the Windrush generation were the first ones to feel the intensity, the stepping up, the ratcheting up of the hostile environment. It's worth saying that it was, in fact, Theresa May, who was then the Home Office, who deliberately and consciously, this is not an accident, deliberately and consciously set up a hostile environment team to deliberately make people feel uncomfortable, not welcome, and to go back. It was harassing migrants. Now, the point is about the Windrush generation is they came to say, you know, post-war, they came to rebuild our country. Many of the children didn't get some of the appropriate paperwork. And some of them, again, they've been in perfectly good jobs. I remember tracing the story of one man who'd worked in a school for several years as a learning mentor. And he suddenly was sacked. There's been people lost their jobs, lost their livelihoods, people not treated at hospital, and deported. And I'm ashamed to say it's still going on. It's that we, you know, when people talk about Windrush finishing, it's not finished. So that's just two of the things that we have been involved in.
Oh, that's fantastic.
But as Yasmin certainly can talk about these European issues.
Yes.
Well, it's interesting that you were talking about the health service particularly, because in fact they did a piece of research on this, which I found, and they went and investigated 8,900 people, out of which only 50 people were ineligible for the service that they were getting. So it's like a sledgehammer to crack a nut. So what Linda says is absolutely very correct, and people are actually making money out of this as well.
Yes,
because
of course,
what is happening is that where, for example, the person can't pay in the hostile environment, they're selling that debt on to bailiff companies.
Right.
So so you know, there's a hostile environment, and there's also people actually making money out of this. So it's worth knowing this. So it's really important, I think. And it's a message to all the communities to know your rights.
Yes.
And people like the Citizens Advice
I was
Bureau.
going to say, where couldn't they go to get
The rights organisations are really important to be in touch with at this time. They've got fantastic websites where you can access a lot of information on your rights. And I think it's a time when people really need to know their rights, because you know, you're going up to maybe an administrative officer who is already under quite a lot of stress as well, because you know, there's been cutbacks, you know, loads of you know, for example, our local authority has had millions of pounds worth of cuts, over 80 million. You know, those cuts are serious cuts, and when you have that, of course, you have a depleted workforce. And so, you know, if you don't know your rights, the person opposite you may be under such pressure that they may not be able to say to you, actually do this
extra. Their own targets and unrealistic expectations.
Absolutely,
them.
absolutely, targets and expectations. Now, talking about the Eastern European that Linda has referred to, there's an organisation called the East European Forum, and
I was going to talk about that.
And I'm hoping that we can one day come with Nishan here, because he's very involved with it, representing about 45 organisations, and I'm involved with that particular grouping. And they are obviously, Brexit is a huge issue, and we're holding a meeting this Sunday together with London Borough of Enfield, to help people understand how they should register, where they should register, etc. But there's a whole load of other little things in between about if you go out of the country, come back in. Yes, so there are different areas where you need to be careful. So it's really important to get along to these information events to find out what to do.
I mean, I was going to say, what is the link between Brexit and racism? Will it have an impact? I mean, is it going to have an impact?
Well, I can tell you that these are the words of the UN Special Rapporteur on it, and he said that the vote, the Brexit vote, has left minorities much more vulnerable to racial discrimination and abuse. And I was looking at the statistics, and I'll tell you the Enfield statistics as well, but we're seeing now 52 racist incidents recorded a day. This is what's recorded.
Within Enfield?
Within London.
Oh,
within London, yes.
52
and
a day.
52 a day. An 81% increase in attacks on people who from the gay and lesbian community. And even bigger for the trans people, and basically, you know, it's escalated massively since the Brexit vote was taken. I know anecdotally today, I was running a surgery alongside the CAB, and children are being affected in class by the racism. They're not necessarily all reporting it because they're young, or may not.
It might not even be reported.
But a piece of work done by Hope Not Hate has revealed that 47% of those under the age of 35 have experienced racism now in the East European community, and they're talking about 70% on social media. So, you know, it's...
Statistics are grim, aren't they?
The
Really
statistics are grim, and statistics are generally those people who report.
Yes, so what about all the...
What about everyone else?
Everything under the water, really, yeah, because I think it's quite an intimidating thing. You know, sometimes people can be racially abused and they might not even know it or understand it.
Absolutely.
Or not have the means to know where to go, especially if it is children who are being targeted as well, then they may not even voice it.
I think schools are a good way of looking at this, because although most schools, as we were talking earlier, they have robust anti-racist equalities programs. The point is, how is that, how active is that, how real is that, and where you really see it, possibly with the over-testing of children and the way in which you know, the arts have been taken off the curriculum and so on and so on, as well as outside. We are concerned about the number of exclusions there are. And of course, if there's young people out on the streets, there is going to be trouble. If there's young people who feel they've got no hope for the future, no jobs, no qualifications, no likelihood of getting them. You know, what we find is very often they'll turn to gangs, and then gangs lead on, totally exploited by gang masters and so on. And of course we see some violence on the street, which of course in Enfield and Tottenham and Haringey, it's of young black people that are excluded, possibly for the same reasons that white and other ethnic groups are also excluded. But it is something that the black community has picked up on very strongly, although we're fully aware that it's, the knife crime goes wider than that.
Of course, yeah.
But that's one of the issues that we have tried to highlight, and we are planning to. There is a kind of petition going around that asks people to sign up to this issue, including local schools.
Well, I thought we were talking earlier with Yasemin about the fact that you were saying a shout out to local businesses to hire more people from. I'll let you sort of, you know, explain this.
Well, Ayesha and Jim, it's really important. This is a time when we need to really all come together, because Brexit has been very divisive for this country, irrespective of which way you voted, leave or remain. I mean, I have respect for both sides of the argument. Everybody has got their very important reasons why they have done what they have done. But we've come to the point now where we have to find a way of bringing people together, because what Brexit has done is, unfortunately, people from minorities had been paying for a very long time already, but it is now the economy, because the economy is going so badly as well in certain respects, you know, it's drawn in loads of people into unnecessary conflict. And as Lynda says, we don't want that getting worse. And when I say come together, I'm saying that, you know, integration was going reasonably well in the past. We need to get to a position where we all reflect on how we can include people from all different communities in our businesses. I mean, we live together as mixed communities, to see how we can also do the same thing, bringing people into our businesses. Particularly, I'm thinking, you know, for example, I go around Edmonton and I see, you know, we've got lots of small businesses there. It's a great opportunity, I think, to be able to include people from the different communities in your business, to broaden it out. You know, talking about black exclusions, for example, it'd be great to see more black youngsters employed in our businesses. They've got fantastic potential, you know, and you know, internationally, different communities are working together. We need to do that in our communities here as well, because, you know, otherwise people feel excluded, and that leads to, you know, other issues.
And if you don't feel a part of a community, especially for the youngsters, then they are going to look. I think it's human nature to want to feel you belong somewhere. And if you don't belong in your immediate community, then you look elsewhere. And a lot of the times the alternatives are not good alternatives, because they're called to do all sorts of different things which aren't really good for them. So I think definitely to bring crime down, we need to think about bringing our communities together.
Because you see, in the past, you know, going back to the 80s and 90s, there was an understanding of what it was to be a working person in working class terms.
Yeah.
And that whole idea has been eroded a bit. And, you know, people are looking at each other as the working class is white, the migrants are something else. It's all sort of split up. And this is actually not a helpful way to look at things. Because at the moment what we really need is that togetherness again. Because the problems that people face are the same.
Universal.
They're universal problems.
That's right.
Universal problems. And talking of the Eastern Europeans, you see, again here, it's about how you identify yourself. And the Turkish-speaking community, of course, we're going out to a Turkish-speaking program, are Eastern Europeans themselves.
That's right. I mean, the work you do for the Eastern European Forum is fantastic.
They are Eastern them to check their status, because those who have perhaps got Greek Cypriot nationality, have got the Cypriot nationality, they would fall in the EU citizens category. They need to find out, you know, what their exact status is. Mustn't rely on just, you know, hearsay, because there are little complications there that need to be ironed out.
I mean, if you could just tell us again, when is your surgery for the EU citizens?
It's taking place, well, we've got a meeting this Sunday at 11 o'clock at Community House in Edmonton.
Right, so that's one to...
Yes, one to know. And then every Friday, between 11 and 1, I'm at Palmer's Green Library, and the Citizens Advice Bureau also there helping with the registrations. So it's important that the people who help with the registrations are qualified in a particular way. And that is why I am there alongside them, because I can help with discussion, but I am not a qualified lawyer in the way they are.
So you bring the people there.
Yeah, I bring the people in. It's seriously important that you go to the right people, because there are only certain types of people who can make that representation.
Right, we've got 5 minutes left.
Can I just, talking about belonging, really. So I think Stand Up to Racism in Enfield, what we've tried to do, and we need to do more, is make contact with different groups. One of our meetings was the Islamic Centre, another one at the Levy Centre. We've had contacts when Yasmin and I have organised vigils in Palmer's Green, Clocktown. So we want to do more of that, not less of that. That's one thing. But the other thing that we've both been involved in is Care for Calais.
Yes, I was going to say that. I was going to get that in the last 5 minutes.
When the word belonging, of course, who doesn't belong, obviously, but refugees, because by definition. And when we've been over and we've talked to the refugees, we've been privileged, I think, to talk to the refugees. I've always been surprised at how easily they want to tell us their stories. And there are many stories because they're from all over the world, but one common thing is their desperation. And most are desperate to reach the UK, sometimes because they have every right. As talking about what Yasmin's points about rights, they do have a human right to arrive in this country and claim asylum. And we're whittling down those rights all the time. In the UK has taken fewer refugees than almost anywhere in Europe. And Alf Dubs, of course, who we've also had some contact with, Lord Dubs, he is also fighting on this, trying to get safe passage, particularly to the young people, the under 18s, many 13, 14-year-olds on their own, to try and get them to this country.
Safe haven.
And that's what we're trying to support. That refugees do have rights, and we will not scapegoat. You know, in the 30s it was Jews, wasn't it? We're scapegoating Jews. Now we're scapegoating Muslims, or we're scapegoating refugees, and that's what we're trying to do, to change the tide of opinion. Say, as Yasmin said, we're all human beings. This is a humanitarian crisis.
But of course the Jewish community are also experiencing a lot of resentment again in Europe, which is most unfortunate. I'm hearing about, for example, that, you know, they had started coming to Germany to live again, and now again leaving You know, there's another separate discussion we need to have
Yes,
with
we
you
do.
about the economics of all of this,
we do.
which may explain why
this
so
is
much
happening.
of this is happening.
Because it seems to be that it's accelerating. I mean, the Care for Calais, the charity, let's just, because we literally are running out of time, but we've got to, we're going to carry on this discussion. I think we need to keep the momentum going, and maybe at least once a month we have this. But tell us about the charity work that you've done, because I know you've actually gone there hands-on, haven't you?
We've both been twice. Bambas Charalambas also came with us, MP, and Kate Osmore intends to come. We've had a number of councillors, including Yasmin on the first one as well. It's an amazing day. It's a very heart-wrenching day. It's a long day. But you do get to meet the refugees. They do tell you the stories. And the idea is that we come back and we tell people what they're really like, that they're not monsters or,
on the pulse, really,
That's
because you
right.
actually you go there and you give it directly to the source, which I think is very important.
Yes,
And that's what's
to
good about
raise money
smaller
for-
charities, is the fact that you have volunteers that actually go directly to the place of need. I think that's
They're all
outstanding.
volunteers, and they get people like us to help as well. We volunteered for a bit longer.
Yes, we went for about a week this time, and you know, we were able to go to the different camps, because there are several camps in the Calais area, although some have been disbanded recently. And you're able to, you know, speak to the families directly, the reasons why they've come, how they're living, and you see it really is heartbreaking. You know, whole families have come and are living in the most precarious situations, you know, literally out in the elements. I mean, one of the places we went to, there were about 150 young men, mainly, under the age of about, you know, 25, living out in the elements, and children amongst them as well, really young.
And they're escaping war.
Yes.
That's the biggest one, but they're escaping death threats.
Religious persecution.
There's so many different reasons why they... I think
Fleeing
it's
for their
fair to
lives,
say
aren't they, really?
nobody wants to leave their home.
No,
There's a poem that starts by a refugee that starts
I
like,
know, I
nobody wants to leave their home. They're only going to do it if the other alternative is death or maiming or bombing, and that's why they're there.
They're desperate.
Absolutely.
Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank
We've run
you.
out of time, unfortunately, but again, we will continue this discussion.
Thank you.
A
Thank
lot
you
of
very
things
much.
discussed here, very much at the forefront, and you know, thank you very much for agreeing to come on my program.
Thank you.
That's it from us for tonight. Thank you very much from the latest printed press. Good night from Euro Gench TV.